So this year I took part in the Pwishner challenge. He runs this challenge twice a year, and this summer was the Kinetic challenge. There were 5 animation templates to pick from for this challenge. I spent approximately 60 hours on this and worked on it over the course of 20 days, and I handed it in about 18 hours before the deadline. On the first day, I just did some basic scene blocking, a bit of research, probably not as much as I should. I just used basic prim shapes to block out the scene and was just trying to get a feel for what I wanted in it. Thought process behind my idea was I like frogs. I wanted it to try and stand out in some way, and I was like, oh yeah, giant monster frogs. I haven't seen anyone do that before. Although funnily enough, actually in this challenge, having seen the top 100, which I didn't make, by the way, there was actually 2 other frog animations in it. It was a bit different because the characters were frogs rather than frogs in the background, but I was like, oh, it's nice to know there's a few other people in the world who are as into frogs as I am. That sounded really weird. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to keep that in. I'm not into frogs. I just like them aesthetically. It's really cool that they've given us these starting animations for if I use something that's already there and then kind of just alter it a little bit. That'd be really cool. I chose a jumping animation really early on just because I already had the idea with the umbrella, and I thought it's going to be in this kind of water world setting. The character carrying an umbrella would make a lot of sense for the storyline of the world. If I was to do this again, which I might, I would do a lot more research. I think I really just kind of had an idea and went with it. I also would probably spend a lot more time thinking about how aesthetically I wanted it to look. There was a lot of technical requirements for this in Blender which I hadn't done before, so my main concern was just getting something that actually worked out the door. Started with using basic prim shapes, and then I merged these, sculpted into it. I re-topologized and added detail with higher poly levels, then baked normals and displacement into image textures. So I caved and brought the full commercial license for quad remesher. If you've seen my frog time-lapse previously, then some eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed that I used it to clean up my frog model. If you've not come across quad remesher before, it's a paid-on add-on for Blender. It's fairly pricey to be honest, but very useful if you sculpt and model organic meshes in Blender, as it will clean up your topology in a couple of clicks. I bought quad remesher because there's been quite a few times where I've been modelling a character or something and been thinking, oh, it'd be so much easier if I had something that would just do this for me, especially because I'm looking to sculpt a lot more in Blender. I just used this model because I knew it was going to be animated, and keeping a scene relatively clean and light really helps when it comes to the animation step. Having to wait for changes to update as you animate makes an already difficult task even more frustrating and labour intensive. It's very important to be able to see how your animation is working and makes this step a lot easier. So I baked the normals and displacement onto image textures and then reapplied them afterwards. This is just to keep the model as streamlined as possible to make animating it easier. When I was painting the frog, I really wanted to use substance. I had already brought quad remesher though, and I couldn't justify another purchase for this challenge. I'm quite glad I didn't use substance in the end though. I feel I'm getting more comfortable with Blender's sculpting and painting tools, and although it's a lot more limited than Substance, you can still achieve a lot of really good effects, especially when used with Blender's shaders. Like I said earlier on, I really wasn't sure stylistically what to go with. I guess it ended up being kind of a cartoony / slightly photoreal aesthetic, so I was just sort of trying to go for a natural look on the skin. I used all the brush masks and stuff just to sort of try and blend it out better. So the glowing on the toad was kind of a spontaneous decision. When I was looking at it in the rendered view, it just looked quite dark in places where it was supposed to look quite light. If I do an emissions pass, I can control that in comp if I want them to glow up at some point. I didn't end up doing that, but it was just a thought. I just kind of kept going with it until I got to a place where I felt oh yeah, look, it looks alright. Something's going on with the frog toes. I used a bump and displacement on this model. I did watch Blender Gory's new video recently where he mentions that Blender doesn't like displacement and normals being used on the same material. It often causes digital artifacts. When I did take off just the normals or the displacement, the body texture it didn't look as good. I really wanted to see how the frog was going to look in the water because I knew most of the frogs were going to be in the background and be kind of swimming in the water. So I kind of wanted to see how thick and atmospheric I needed the water to be. I link up at top if you want to see how I made that water. I've got a quick tutorial there. I created this kind of like pond scum on the frog's head. The way I created it is a technique I've seen a lot of people use for quite stylized hair in Blender, but I just did it so I could get those kind of pond scummy stuff coming off its head. It's essentially just a curve and then another custom curve shape attached to it sort of thing to make the shape, and then you just control it using a curve. I created the frog scum in this way just because it was easier to control and I thought it looked quite good. Onto the rigging. I found the rigging of the frog challenging. Yeah, it was quite hard. I think because I decided I really wanted to do IK handles for this one, and in my previous fox animation I never bothered with IK handles because I was like, oh, it's just too much work, and then I really regretted not doing it because it made like animating so much more labor intensive than it would have been if I just had some IK handles on them. And so I made the rig with an IK FK rig, but they both had equal strength rather than a switch, and I did this because I knew that the frog would be doing things with its arms in the foreground that I'd need control over, but I still wanted to be able to use the IK handles as well to just sort of speed up getting it into the basic position. So I just put them on 50% strength so I could sort of use both at the same time. I probably shouldn't have bothered with IK handles really, looking back on it, because only the front frog that's on the lily pad even moves its arms. The rest of them are underwater the whole time, so you can't even see them. And the motion is so quick you can barely see the frog moving in the foreground, and also because of the way I needed its arms to move in front of its eyes, I ended up having to use the FK handles quite a lot anyway. So yeah, no, actually it was kind of a pointless exercise. Looking back on it, I really didn't think it through that well at the time. I just thought, oh, this is a good excuse to learn how to do IK handles. Not really thinking that actually all the frogs are going to be pretty much submerged up to their neck in water. But I did enjoy learning it, and I'm glad I did, because at least, you know, I've done it once now. Hopefully I can do it again. So I rigged the frog expressions just with shape keys, and that felt really easy and nice actually. I've used shape keys very briefly when I was doing the blocking phase for this project, and you just, you know, you can just put up the power you want on it. It's just it's very similar to how Maya works with any facial expression shape keys, so it's essentially exactly the same. So yeah, that was nice and easy. I learned to rig just by watching YouTube videos. Yeah, that's pretty much how I learn everything, YouTube. So at this point I jumped back into the main scene. I went back into the main scene because I sort of was really losing enthusiasm for this project at this point. I got really caught up doing the frog, and then I had no idea how it's coming together. I got quite worried that it was going to look really not very good. So I was like, I need to just get into the main scene and just start putting this all together. So after the basic kind of prim shape, like blocking of the scene, the rest of this is just assets pulled from Polyhaven. And I only used 3 assets because I'd already gone way over budget for this production, which had a £0 budget for it anyway, just by buying the quad remesher, which, to be fair, will come in use, I hope, down the line. But I couldn't justify spending any more money on this particular project. I didn't have loads of time to work on this. A lot of this was kind of in and around other stuff I was doing, so I am just pull loads of assets, especially because they were seen so briefly anyway. I kind of wish I'd known that a bit earlier on really, and just thought how quickly you're going to see stuff that's stationary. But yeah, anyway, so the idea was that she's kind of running along all these bits of junk in the water and stuff. So I kind of just made this sort of pathway from downloaded assets that kind of could look like they were the remnants of a makeshift bridge. I also added some Gobo lights in Blender. Video just linked up here if you want to see how I did this. You can do this in Nuke as well, which I also have a tutorial on if you're interested in, but I decided to do it in Blender because I wanted my Nuke project to not get too bogged down with too much lighting. And doing it in Blender works perfectly fine, so I just figured I would do it in Blender. I don't think I really planned this scene very well at all, which is something, if I do this again, I will definitely put a bit more thought into that. So now that the scene was in a place where I was more or less happy with, I decided to jump back into the frog animation. I started with the foreground frog because out of all the frogs he was going to be doing the most. The rest of them were just going to be kind of dipping in and out of the water, so you don't actually even see most of the animation of the little frog in the foreground that's sitting on the lily because the shot's just moving so quickly. And then I moved on to the larger frogs in the background. I found animating the frogs relatively easy actually. They weren't doing anything too complicated, and like I said, the foreground frog was seen so quickly they didn't really matter that the animation wasn't like amazing, and then the ones in the background, they're just kind of diving in and out. There was a few bits that I had to redo, but yeah, it didn't didn't take that long to animate really, which was nice. I think I was happy with the animation. The thing is, you see it so quickly that you don't even really take that much of it in. It did what it needed to do. So finally, I moved on to the character, which was probably the biggest challenge of this project. So I actually started her near the very beginning. I think it was on day 2, but I did multiple alterations and they were all scrapped. I started the same way every time, so I used the original template body that was given for the challenge. I did this just so all the proportions would be very similar and it would work with the rig that was already in place. The first 5 attempts she looked wild, and not in the good way. She wasn't a good wild woman. She was didn't look like a human being in any kind of way. And to be honest, I still wasn't really like that pleased with her. I was going for this really like certain aesthetic, and I was sort of trying to build on the stuff I'd done before with my little trickster video, but more like grown up and a bit less cutesy, but somewhere in the middle. And she never really came together, bless her. She tried, and to be honest, I think if I do this again, I wouldn't go such a stylistic eye anyway next time. I think I'll try and make something more realistic, or just do a completely different style and go something very stylized. I'm not sure. That's a problem for next time. And the thing was, actually, when I handed it in, because this is my first time doing a Pwishner challenge, they actually ask you on the form when you're submitting it how you would describe your animation. Like, is it stylized, is it realistic? And there's like a whole bunch of them, which I didn't realise that you kind of had to fit it into one genre. I really didn't know what to click on because I gave mine no thought, so I just clicked stylized. But yeah, that may have been a mistake. Anyway, moving on. The next step was re-topologizing and cleaning up the mesh. Although I now had the quad remesher and it generally creates very clean topology, I don't think, unless there's some features I'm missing, that there's a way to use this effectively on human faces if you intend to animate them. So yeah, I manually cleaned up the face. Unfortunately, I didn't end up animating this character's face, so this was all for naught. So I kind of just blindly ran at this challenge. I gave very little thought to how stylistically this would work. I remember thinking at this point, how is this going to work with the frogs? She looks really different. And then I just did it anyway, essentially. And as the deadline appeared over the horizon, my aim was just to finish this task. If I compete again, this is something I would like to give a lot more thought. But yeah, at this point, I was just really hoping I could bring it all together in comp and get it finished in time. There's quite a lot of techniques you can use to create eyelashes. I spent way too long actually on the eyelashes. I tried out a whole bunch of different things and none of it looked very good. What I originally tried was just kind of like a thick black kind of outline for them, just on a plane, and then I tried putting like some image textures on it, and then I kind of ended up going back to this curve idea because it's the only one that sort of looked like it was working with the model. And originally I covered the entire eyelash with them and it just looked wild, so I took it way back and went for a more simplistic look. I used this technique in the end just because it's the only one that I felt was kind of working with how the model looked in general. So I animated and just adjusted the jumping animation on the starting character rather than directly animating final character, because like I said earlier, she had a lot of failed attempts and I just got really disheartened, so I decided to just put her off to the end. But I did want to see how the animation was going to work with them holding the umbrella and things like that. I think it's a totally fine way of doing it. I might do it again that way in the future, regardless, assuming they give us templates again in the future, because it's quite nice to just get the animation kind of roughly working so you know what's happening and you can worry about what the character's going to look like later. So I think it's quite a good way of doing it. The weight painting I found a bit tricky actually on this model. She just kept like being pulled apart, I think because I was trying to weight paint once they were already in mid-run and that wasn't working, so I just had to turn all that off and then put the animation back on after I got the weight painting right. So yeah, I just ended up taking the animation off, posing her in different positions to get the weight painting right, and then just pasting the animation back on afterwards. This is the first time creating animated clothing in Blender, and to be honest, it was very challenging. I ran into loads of issues when using the cloth simulation. I tried following a bunch of different cloth sim tutorials, but it broke every time, and I just kept running into the same problem. The starting bit worked fine, kind of getting the clothes to attach to the rig and just sort of, you know, morph a bit with the rig and stuff, absolutely fine. But then as soon as I ever tried to bring in a sim, it just all broke. And I still don't know why that was happening. In the end, I didn't bother because the character was moving so fast and actually it looked alright without a cloth sim on it. It's something I would like to spend a lot more time actually learning about because I couldn't find a good fix for this. I don't know what was going on. Maybe the animation's just moving too fast. I don't know why the cloth sim kept breaking, but it's something I'm going to look into at some point. The hair sim was also actually really challenging. I've created hair before but never animated it. It was just a lot of trial and error and going back and rendering it out. I'm hoping that I've managed to retain enough information about where I went wrong to make it less difficult in the future. The umbrella prop was really straightforward actually. That was nice. It was easy to do. So modelling it was really quick, and yeah, the shape keys worked really easily. And it worked well for the animation that I needed to do because it just had one simple open and close function. So yeah, that was nice and easy out of those 2 days with everything else being challenging. It was nice to have something that just worked. I actually regret not animating the face. I mean, okay, I don't regret it because I don't think it would have made top 100 anyway, but I think it did hurt my animation overall because you do notice it, and she looks a bit like a doll's head when she's running. I don't hate it, but it's a bit bizarre because her body is obviously quite dynamic because, you know, someone else animated it, and then her face is just kind of like bobbing along, and because her eyes are so big, it's quite noticeable. So if I thought I was going to make top 100, I should have animated that because that could have been the difference. I don't think the rest of the scene is strong enough anyway, so I don't think it mattered, but I could see that being a reason why someone's would not make top 100. Yeah, I was actually really happy with the animation this time around, so I chose a different jumping animation to what I originally started with and readjusted it with the umbrella, and I felt it looked a lot better than my original one. It was really useful for someone who doesn't animate much to have a starting animation, so appreciate that. So finally, onto the compositing. One of my favourite parts, especially after a lot of trial and error and difficulties in Blender and learning lots, but struggling lots as well. I really liked how the Z pass looked, and I was a bit tempted to use this as my final submission. It looked really dramatic and kind of cool. I decided not to because I put so much work into what it was supposed to look like with all the colour, and I kind of thought that they would just see that and be like, why have they just used a Z depth pass rather than an actual 3D render? The motion blur and the Z depth actually ended up being a bit of a struggle in Nuke. I wanted to use the denoise pass, but I didn't realise that when you use a denoise Z depth pass, it doesn't come with the background from the sky dome. Yeah, it doesn't bake it in, it just gets rid of it. So you have like a black, and then it creates all these weird outlining artifacts and stuff. So in the end, I had to put a plane behind it because I needed it to have a background because it was messing up my Z depth pass. So that was annoying. I didn't just bake the motion blend depth of field straight out of the render. You can do that, and you may have noticed when I was working on it in 3D, I had my f-stop and stuff sets on my camera, so you had some depth of field and motion blur and things like that, and then I turned it off when I rendered it. Just because I like to have pure control in comp, I wasn't sure how much depth of field I wanted, and I wanted to be able to control it a lot more than I could in 3D, and the same with the motion blur. But because there was issues with this, if this was a professional delivery, I probably would have gone back, re-rendered it with the motion blur and depth of field baked in. I use the Cryptomatte pass a lot during the compositing phase. To be fair, I normally use them a lot. They're really useful and like dead easy to export from Blender. You can kind of choose if you want object or material IDs and stuff. I tend to just go object ID most of the time. But yeah, it just gives everything an object ID. You just attach your Cryptomatte node, then you literally just use an eyedropper and select the bits you want to use, and then that's just automatic masking. Really easy, really useful if you want to change colours or use it in conjunction with other passes you have. There's a video linked up here, which is the AOVs and cameras and my pipeline from Blender to Nuke, and I've included how I export Cryptomatte passes in that and how to use them in Nuke, so yeah, check it out if you want more information. So I did a little bit of relighting as well in comp. You can actually do quite a lot of relighting in comp. I used the normals pass to change the lighting a bit and stuff because I wanted some kind of like strong green highlights and stuff on the girl that I didn't put in the 3D phase. You can fake a lot just with normals. You can just mess around. It's still a 2D image, so you're not getting bogged down, and it can work really effectively. So there's a link up here as well for relighting with normals. It's a really useful one to know. You can also put an extra lighting using a positioned points pass and your normals pass. I do a lighting tutorial for Gobo lighting with Nuke, but the same principles apply with different lights. Created the fireflies in Nuke rather than in Blender. It was kind of a last minute idea, to be honest. Partly, but also I'd done a lot in Blender. The scene was getting really heavy, so I just thought you can do the stuff like easy in Nuke. Exported it as a 2D image, then put it back on a plane and put it back into the 3D space. I figured out where it needed to go using the points to position pass and just sort of moved it around. I used the Z depth pass to mask the fireflies in the foreground. I just did this because it was easiest. You could have used a cryptomatte pass as well to mask them, but the Z-depth just obviously just got everything that was in the foreground, and I felt that was kind of easier. I really like this challenge in general. It was really hard. I remember watching some other people before I started this one saying about finishing it. That can be quite a challenge, and that definitely is a challenge, finishing. Maybe because you might think you're not going to make top 100, which is how I felt. That was actually the good thing about making this video, is that I was like, well, I want to make a video about it, so I have to finish it. I would definitely recommend this challenge to others. It's worth doing just to push yourself. It was a really good excuse to have a go at things I haven't tried. Even though I found the clothing simulation stuff really challenging, it's actually something I really enjoyed as well, and I would love to learn more about it and how to do it really well. I actually did like my final result. I know it's not the best, but I was also happy with it because it was a lot of work, and I'm glad I finished it. And I think there's some good things about it. There's definitely some areas that need some work and could be improved, but I'm glad I gave it a go. Thanks so much for watching. If I haven't included tutorials for certain elements of this video, it's because I don't feel knowledgeable enough about those areas to create a tutorial for them at this time. And yeah, if you're interested in watching any more challenges and things I've taken on, I would recommend giving this Little Fox in the Wood video a watch. It's a remake of the very first competition I ever entered. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Megan out. I don't know what to say at the end. Bye. Megan out. Meg out. Yeah. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.